What is up, basketball fans? Welcome to the NBA Outlet. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, my guy, Kory Waldron. Kory, how are we doing?
Doing good. It's a wacky Wednesday, right?
And we're almost to trade season. December 15th is right upon us. We were talking Kevin Love trades last time. And like you mentioned, December 15th, now teams can start to move players they acquired this offseason. But before we get into it, quick reminder, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, OTGBasketball.com, and YouTube. Also, make sure you head to Design/Off the Glass. We just dropped some OTG hoodies. They're pretty nice if you ask me. But
hoodie season, baby.
Yeah, it will keep you warm. But let's dive into these trades. Kory, any specific rumor you want to start with? Because there's a lot.
No, I mean, we can start anywhere, man. We have a good amount of stuff to talk about. Obviously, Oklahoma City making 3 of their top players available. We talked about Kevin Love. The Knicks, obviously, are another team. So wherever you want to jump into, I'm ready to do it.
Let's start with OKC because I think they could have a big impact on trade season, not just because they're willing to move some of their guys, like you mentioned, Steven Adams, Chris Paul, Gallinari, but OKC is willing to take on bad contracts either to help facilitate a trade and get a pick back or something along those lines. So they could either move somebody, they could be a third team in a bigger trade. I think OKC is going to be part of the action.
Yeah, OKC, and also they're above the luxury tax.
And they said they don't mind paying it, because they're only going to pay it this year.
Right. But again, looking at the contracts they have on the books, looking at who they have, and just, realistically where they are in their timeline as a franchise, it just doesn't make sense to hold on to, as we mentioned, Gallinari, Adams, Chris Paul. All of these guys are meant to be maybe not meant to be is the right word, but they should be on a team that's playing for something more than what OKC realistically is playing for.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I would even throw in Dennis Schroeder. I think he could be another name that could get moved, and he's only at 15 mil. And it's a lot easier to move 15 million than it is to move 22 from Gallinari, 29 for 25 for Steven Adams, and 38 for Chris Paul is almost impossible.
Yeah.
So, out of those guys, which one do you think is most likely to be moved? And like we mentioned, this is all speculation. There's no actual real trade rumors quite yet, but teams are starting to mention, hey, this guy might be available. Other teams are kind of lurking around about who might be available. And OKC is just one of these perfect fringe teams.
Yeah, so funny enough, I had a tweet last night, I believe, where I kind of ranked how I saw the trade values of the Oklahoma City players. This wasn't including Dennis Schroeder, but I can even throw Dennis Schroeder in the mix. I think Gallinari has the most trade value between production and contract wise, and then I would say Chris Paul is second because Chris Paul has shown that he's obviously still a top-notch point guard. The money is the biggest hurdle when it comes to Chris Paul, and then I would have probably Adam. I probably would have Schroeder third, and then Adams fourth. Adams being at 25 million. The fact of the matter is, Adams is a very good, serviceable center, but completely, I think, overpaid for what he kind of brings to a team and what he does for a team. And as you kind of mentioned, Schroeder being at just 15 million provides offense and at least some sort of spark off of the bench. I don't believe he's a starter right now in the league or at this point in his career, but still a very worthy bench player, role player with key minutes.
Yeah, he could give your bench a nice boost and give you that kind of backup point guard that could maybe spend some time with your starters as well. I'd say Gallinari is definitely the most likely to be moved, especially because it's expiring. You're not committing to him. And he also seems like an easy guy to incorporate into whatever your offense is running. A catch and shoot guy, high basketball IQ. Gallinari can fit onto a lot of different teams. And I'd almost say Schroeder might be even the second most likely to get moved just because his contract is movable. Where you mentioned, Steven Adams at 25 mil, you got to really love Steven Adams. If it was 20, I could definitely see it being moved, but 25 just seems like too much. And I just have a really hard time seeing a team make a move for Chris Paul with that contract, especially not just this year. We've touched on it a lot. He's got 38 this year, 41 next year, then a player option for the third year at $44 million.
Yeah, the Chris Paul, contract and the fact that it goes up, as you mentioned, that 44 that final year. We've already seen, a slight dippage in his production. Obviously he's getting a little bit older and his size, it all plays a part in that slight decline. But you're right. His contract is for sure the hardest to move. And the issue with Chris Paul is the fact that only a handful of teams, not even a handful of teams, can really pull off a Chris Paul trade unless a third team gets involved.
Yeah, you have to get extremely creative to bring in 38 million on your books right now, unless you have a whole bunch of other bad contracts or big contracts for some reason. But not many teams in the NBA have that, especially teams competing for a championship. But kind of tying this together, Portland's been a team that's been looked at as a buyer, and they've been tied to Gallinari. That's a guy they're interested in. How would you like that fit, and how would you compare it in terms of would you rather see Portland go after Gallinari or go after Kevin Love?
Um, it's tough. I think if I'm Portland for cap flexibility purposes, I think I'd rather go after Gallinari.
Yep.
I just think it makes more sense as the fact that Kevin Love, even though may fit a role better for them, being a true power forward, has a good rebounding abilities, but defensively, that's already an issue with Portland. I think Kevin Love is a big negative defender. Now, granted, it's not like Gallinari is by any means a good defender himself, but I think him as a three, him as a stretch four, his contract just fits more of what Portland wants to do, I believe, for this time period. So I just think Gallo kind of fits what they want to do more than Kevin Love. And I think, again, Gallo's contract doesn't hurt them long term, as Kevin Love's might hurt them long term.
Yeah, you can see the fit with Gallinari working out really well. And like you mentioned, the contract is a big issue. And then also, you look at it from this perspective, and the negative side, the opposite side would be like, they might have an easier time trading for Kevin Love because they're one of few teams that could match that contract or take in that type of contract. Well, Gallinari is going to have a lot of suitors. A lot of teams are going to be interested in him because the contract isn't ginormous. And like you mentioned, you're getting off it after the season.
Yeah.
So, but moving on to another team, they haven't really been tied to specific players, but the word is that they've been pretty active. And a lot of these rumors are coming from Woj, Shams, Kevin O'Connor, just all types of NBA Twitter, has been the Miami Heat.
Yeah, first off, shout out to Kevin O'Connor. It feels like he's really popped now as a scene for a guy who really knows inside information.
It started last year and then it just continued into this year. And I mean, he dropped probably I like that he drops his news almost in an article form. So yeah. It's more interesting and entertaining even.
So I'm guessing you read the article from yesterday too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad we're on the same wavelength. Yeah. And who'd you just mention? You said
Miami Heat. Yep.
I mean, the Miami Heat, big overtime win last night. First of all, I just want to say, Trae Young, don't ever say a game's over when it's 6 points and there's still a minute left
big
in the
yikes.
Game. That is not something you do. And the Miami Heat stunned him by going on a 22-0 run to end regulation and start overtime. But yeah, the Miami Heat are an interesting spot, right? I mean, I don't necessarily know what type of move makes them that much better. I don't know if a Gallinari makes them that much better. I don't know if bringing in a point guard like Chris Paul makes them that much better. Because realistically, I like what Miami has. I guess if you're trying to move Goran Dragic or maybe a James Johnson, I think that makes sense. But realistically, I wouldn't want to shake up what the Miami Heat have too much, personally.
I think that's the issue with the Heat. And then also, obviously, salary moving forward. I don't think this offseason, but the following one, they're going to have some cap space. So it's they don't want to interfere with long-term contracts. And they have so many good young players. It's almost like the assets they have are too good to trade for some of the names they've been tied to, maybe in this previous offseason, because they can turn into all-star players where there's not really that Bradley Beal type player available right now. Because Kevin Love, I don't think it's worth trading one of their young pieces unless you're getting him on the cheap.
Yeah, and also I just don't know how much I like the fit of Kevin Love on this roster. I get it, Bam Adebayo can play power forward or center. And obviously he's more of a defensive-minded center or defensive-minded player in general than that of a Kevin Love. But I don't love the fit of Kevin Love on this team. I just don't think it puts them any higher. You know what I'm saying? I feel like right now, if you were to trade for Kevin Love, does this Miami Heat team get better? Maybe they remain the same, or maybe they get slightly worse defensively.
Yeah, I think they'd probably get better offensively, get more of a consistent force. But then also it comes with a question. And I think this is something that people haven't really talked about enough is how much of an impact is Kevin Love having on your team in terms of winning? We haven't seen him play meaningful basketball in a couple seasons, and we know his game isn't extremely efficient.
And again, not that the Cleveland stint with LeBron and Kyrie there was bad by any means, but there was constantly a conversation of Kevin Love defensively, right?
Yep.
Especially in those NBA finals against the Warriors, it seemed like he got singled out. Switch's word, attack Kevin Love when he was on the floor. Now, granted, in that Game 7, had arguably one of the biggest hustle performances in that game 7, having like 18 rebounds, a couple big defensive moments on Steph Curry late when they tried to force the switches through him. But like you mentioned, that was also, 3 years ago now, or 3 years ago now. What does he look like on a competing team going forward? Obviously, he is in good shape, but also you have to keep in mind, this is a guy who, knock on wood, has had a lot of injuries these past couple of years.
Yeah. So at all those points, it's like, what is he
Why, Mike?
bringing?
It's
Yeah.
like,
And
why?
is he pushing you to that next level? I think there's a couple teams where maybe he'd be an ideal fit and he could push them to that next level. They have forward issue, but the teams tied to him so far, we've kind of mentioned already. Portland's been kind of confirmed, and then it's been mentioned that Denver and Phoenix are 2 other teams.
Yeah, and actually Phoenix came out today and they said they have no interest in Kevin Love.
Okay, well, there you have it.
Yeah,
So
James Jones said that they're not interested in pursuing Kevin Love, which I think makes sense because personally, Phoenix doesn't necessarily have the assets either that I would like. For example, if you're going to trade for Kevin Love, you'd probably have to give up, one of your younger players. We mentioned this on the last show, and I don't know necessarily if I would want to get rid of any of my key guys, and I don't know if moving maybe Tyler Johnson for contract purposes obviously works, but you'd have to pair maybe Dario Saric or a pick because you don't want to move Ricky Rubio, Devin Booker, Kelly Oubre Jr. Those guys you want to hold on to as you move this young core forward. So obviously, Phoenix taking the name out of the race makes sense. And what was the other team?
Portland and Denver, and it's been noted that Kevin Love prefers to go to Portland. That's his hometown team.
Right. I mean, Portland I think makes sense, but again, like defensively, that's been Portland's issue so far this year as well. And if you're adding like a lineup, once again. You would lose Whiteside in that scenario, so at least they're getting rid of Whiteside. But Kevin
there is
Love,
a scenario where they could keep Whiteside too.
Oof. Okay, even still, a lineup of Whiteside, Love, Melo, McCollum, and Lillard is very bad defensively. Maybe not so bad offensively, but even still with Whiteside there, it's a little bit shaky. So I don't love that move for Portland either. I think Denver kind of makes sense because Denver actually right now is one of the better defensive teams in the NBA. They were in a slugfest last night against Philly. And if they want to move on from a older Paul Millsap, Kevin Love does give them added rebounding at that 4 and 3-point shooting, which would help their offense. But again, it just feels like you're trading one player who's on the backside of his career for another who is maybe a year away from being on the backside of his.
And like I mentioned on the last show, Kevin Love and Nikola Jokic would be the worst defensive front court in the NBA. Probably like in the last 5 seasons. They would just be terribly bad.
Really good rebounding, though.
Yeah, it would have good rebounding, but there wouldn't be a lot of missed shots because the other team would be hitting them all. But moving on to some other teams or some other news, a player that teams are keeping an eye on, Marvin Williams of the Charlotte Hornets.
Now this is a guy who I've actually been interested in for several years dating back, because he's been on the Hornets his entire career. Marvin Williams is a stretch 4. Granted, in the second half of his career, was a starter for a lot of years, no longer a starting caliber player, but as a stretch 4 guy who can provide 3-point shooting off the bench, I feel like he's a good locker room guy as well. Marvin Williams is a guy I think will have suitors. I think if Philly was looking for a guy, I think he could have a spot even in Brooklyn. I know Brooklyn has been one of those teams that's constantly kind of looking for that stretch 4 type of player. Marvin Williams could be that type of role player just to fill in. Detroit maybe. I think Orlando if they wanted some added shooting at the perimeter. And then I think Houston, if Houston wanted to try and find something, Dallas. 3-point shooting is the one thing that every NBA team is looking to acquire.
Yeah, and Marvin Williams is a guy that can provide that. He's a solid vet. He's not, amazing. He's not going to take you to a championship level, but he can give you some depth to your bench. I think the interesting thing with him would be is Charlotte going to be able to trade him, or is he just going to end up being bought out?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, some small trade market for him, but again, I would wonder what they would expect in return because I feel
he's making $15 million on expiring.
Well, I didn't even realize he was making $15 million.
It makes it a little bit harder.
It does make it a little bit hard because Marvin Williams is not a $15 million player. If it was $8 or $9 million, I'd feel a little bit better about it. 15's a little hefty. This sounds more like a buyout player than it does a trade player.
Yeah, I agree. Now moving on to another team in the Southeast Division, that's the Atlanta Hawks. This is kind of tied to a rumor that we heard the other day about Trae Young kind of having an emotional outburst after the game, after the team losing so much, and then one of the executives mentioning they're going to get Trae some help. Who do you think Atlanta could be targeting?
I saw someone saying Kevin Love, but Kevin Love wants to go to a contender. So bringing Kevin Love into Atlanta, I don't think Kevin Love would be very happy with that. I think Trae Young would be happy because I think if you do add Kevin Love to Atlanta, hypothetically Kevin Love to the Atlanta Hawks roster, I think he does add like 10 wins, right? I would
And
have
then
to
you
see.
get John Collins back, and then all of a sudden you're maybe looking like a playoff team in the Eastern Conference.
Right. Which, isn't a terrible route to take because then next year you still have Kevin Love. Maybe you add another player, and then you're a little bit closer to being, or maybe you're a lock for a playoff team next year if you keep Kevin Love. But I don't think it makes sense. And again, like if you're the Atlanta Hawks, like yes, Trae Young must be maybe frustrated, and you want to keep your star happy, especially in year 2 of his NBA career. But again, this is kind of what the Atlanta Hawks are supposed to do, right? They're young.
Yep.
They're not supposed to go out and acquire a vet to help them win now. Winning now is not where the Atlanta Hawks are. So I think the organization actually just in a tough position because realistically, even though you probably wanted to win more games to start this year, it's not the worst thing that you're losing, and you don't want to trade away any young assets for a win now player for what? Because you're not making a playoff run, right? Even if you make the playoffs as a 1 seed, you're not beating any of these home court teams if you're the Atlanta Hawks. I just don't see any player that moves the needle far enough for me in the Atlanta Hawks.
Yeah, I think if you're the Hawks, you have to look at adding a young piece that can get better that maybe a team is trying to get rid of because they don't want to pay their contract this upcoming offseason. A guy that comes to mind is like Malik Beasley of Denver. They had contract negotiations. It didn't work out. Maybe Atlanta makes a move for him. He's 23 years old. He can kind of fit with that core as well.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like the Hawks, like where is the hole, right? The hole for the Atlanta Hawks is at center.
The whole I feel for the Hawks. I mean, it depends on
Center
if you're
deep.
looking at this season or like moving forward. This season, I would say it's everywhere but point guard and power forward.
Right.
But they have wings and Cam Reddish and Hunter that they think can develop. And I mean, they look good. They just need time and they need patience.
Exactly. I think if you were gonna make a move, like looking for some sort of actual true center would be the best idea because realistically, Alex Lund has kind of showed what he is, right? He's a backup center at best. You don't want to be rolling him out, 82 games as your starter. He's just not that good defensively. And that's probably the one thing, if I could make a trade and bring in a center that could help, now, maybe that's something I do. But again, like I wouldn't want to jeopardize playing time for DeAndre Hunter or Cam Reddish because I think Hunter, even last night, has shown flashes. And
They
Reddish,
look good.
as you've mentioned, has gotten better. So I believe in those two guys going forward. The John Collins suspension is really what sucks.
Yeah. It pretty much hampered their entire season. And also Kevin Herter just feeling like he's never been healthy this season hasn't been great either. So it's like two of these young building blocks you have other than Trae Young haven't even been able to play, big minutes this season and develop chemistry. And I agree. I think like finding some type of rim running center would be ideal. Obviously, they have Damian Jones, who they kind of like to develop, but I don't think he'll ever be, an all-star level player or even just an above-average starter. So I think that's an area they could possibly attack. And I think it would make Trey's life a lot easier if he had a good center.
Yeah, no, it definitely would.
Now,
Or
moving
not.
on. Yeah, exactly. More lobs, especially if you had John Collins in there too. A big name, a popular name that's been tied, and it feels like his name is mentioned a lot at the trade deadline. That's Robert Covington, and the most popular team tied to him has been the Houston Rockets.
I mean, Robert Covington is a guy that we kind of pinpointed earlier in the year that, if, for example, the Warriors wanted to trade D'Angelo Russell and the Timberwolves wanted to go after D'Angelo Russell, that Robert Covington would probably be a big part of that deal because he is just a prototypical 3-and-D type player. And Houston, obviously, looking at where Houston's at, defense has been their hurdle so far to this point, right? You're getting a lot of offense from James Harden. You're getting a full stat sheet from Russell Westbrook, not necessarily with efficiency. PJ Tucker is solid.
Turnovers and misses included.
Right. PJ Tucker's great. There's nothing bad to say about PJ Tucker. Clint Capella, he fits the role of what he's asked to do. And losing Eric Gordon has hurt, but again, they need defense. And obviously with the system they run, they need defense that comes with someone who can shoot 3-pointers. Robert Covington is that guy. But I don't see any, like, I mean, Houston's going to put their name in the hat because this is what Houston does, but I don't see really a way for Houston to get Robert Covington. Like, I don't see what pieces on this team, I guess you'd have to throw in some draft picks, but I don't see any way that Houston makes a deal or puts anyone on the table that Minnesota's like, okay, yeah, I want to make this deal.
Yeah, and their draft pick situation can't be amazing after the Westbrook trade. I know they threw a
Exactly.
couple in there. I think the only scenario that would really make sense is either Eric Gordon going to Minnesota or Gordon going to another team, a young asset going to Minnesota, and then Houston maybe still even sending some type of draft asset to Minnesota too.
And I don't
But
know if losing Eric Gordon for Covington makes them better. I mean, it makes them a better defensive team, and you're adding probably a better 3-point percentage player at this point in time as Robert Covington. But again, Eric Gordon is, a 6 man of the year type of player, who obviously was hampered by his knee injury, which led to him struggling heavily early on in this year. So I think that's just a hard dilemma at the moment.
yeah, I think you could look at it this way. It's like maybe you feel good as, obviously Gordon hasn't really played much this season. You're still doing pretty well. And I think Covington checks some boxes that you haven't been able to check in a while in terms of having that, 3-and-D switchy wing other than PJ Tucker.
Yeah,
So I think,
he fits the role of like Trevor Ariza almost. Would you say?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Except I would say better defensively, especially as like an off-ball defender. So I think Covington could be a really nice add for them. But like you said, it's going to be tough to make it happen. I think a lot of teams are like hoping for some names that they just can't acquire.
And can I drop a hot take real quick on the Houston Rockets?
Do it up.
The Houston Rockets were better with Chris Paul. That's it.
I think that's a fair take. I don't think, Westbrook has done anything where you're like, wow, they're so much better with him. I'd say the one plus he's brought is transition buckets and an improved pace, but Chris Paul is giving you a better leader for that second unit and obviously a better defender.
And not as sloppy with the basketball.
Yeah. And it just doesn't try to do crazy things. Like Westbrook just tries to do too many crazy things once in a while. But getting to some shooters that'll probably be on the market, they haven't necessarily been tied to teams, but the rumor is teams expect them to be available. Davis Bertans, JJ Redick, and then to a lesser extent, Marcus Morris.
Yeah, I mean we hit the nail on the head last week by mentioning JJ Redick before it was even mentioned. But
we mentioned Bertans at the Wizards season preview.
Right. I mean, Bertans, after last night's performance, 32 points, career high, 8 3-pointers. I saw a lot of people saying some of the shots he was taking, he would never have been able to even take in San Antonio because he would have gotten benched immediately. But that's when a change in scenery really pays off. So I think Bertans will be a name that we're going to see tied to a lot of teams. I mean, his 3-point shooting, and also a decent rebounder as well, to his credit. I'm interested to see where he goes. And then like a guy like JJ Redick, again, the 3-point shooting that he can bring to a team. We saw how important he was to what Philly did in years past. We saw so far in his time with the Pelicans, the 3-point shot is still there and a part of his game offensively. It's just kind of finding those teams that fit. Obviously, the Lakers, Rockets, even the Sixers, to throw up their name again. I think all of those teams sort of make sense for what they want from the 3-point shooters.
Yeah, and I think the thing with JJ Redick compared to maybe Bertans is JJ Redick could also provide a little bit of offense too. I think for your like second unit, you're just running screens for him to not just shoot threes with mid-range shots. Be interesting to see what Davis Bertans does in a situation after being in Washington, because like you mentioned, he's been unlocked. But in San Antonio, we didn't see this. Some of that's probably the Spurs, but some of that is also Davis Bertans playing on the Wizards, who aren't a great team. Yeah, their record's not horrendous, but they kind of everybody on that squad has a green light.
Yeah. And then just to touch on Marcus Morris, I think, there's a difference between Bertans and JJ Redick and then Marcus Morris. Now, offensively, Bertans and JJ Redick, I think, are both the clear-cut better players, or at least the better shooters. Morris, you're not getting so much a clear 3-and-D player, but you're getting a player who at least has a way more defensive mindset to his game, with added 3-point shooting to it. So I think if you're looking for a more defensive wing who can bring you some offense, it's Marcus Morris. Whereas if you're looking for a stretch 4 or you're looking for a shooting guard, a true shooting guard, you go after Bertans and Redick.
And Marcus Morris also brings some toughness to your team.
Right.
Like he doesn't really take shit, and he's going to be a guy that can give you a nice little punch. And then also I think he can provide you some offense, obviously not consistently. He's a very streaky shooter, but occasionally he can get hot and, almost win you a game. We saw a lot last year with Boston.
Yeah, I think Marcus Morris is a guy that, again, his contract will be tough. Not tough to move. It's, $15 million. But, I see, again, like a team like Philly. I see a team like Houston. I think Marcus Morris makes sense for those kind of teams where you're looking for defense with shooting.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Philly's a name that's going to be tied a lot. And I actually have a question for you about them later on in the show. Just to touch on a couple of bigs, Derek Favors been a name that's been mentioned a lot. And then also there's been some rumblings about Andre Drummond. Zach Lowe brought up on his podcast. Drummond's going to be a free agent. Is Detroit going to want to pay him a ton of money, or they want to get some value for him at the deadline where it's kind of looking like they could miss the playoffs? They could make the playoffs. We don't really know.
I mean, both those guys, for example, would be interesting targets, I think, for the Atlanta Hawks.
Derek Favors specific. Actually, you're right. Both guys would be, because Andre Drummond's still really young too, and they could afford to pay him, unlike most teams.
Right. And again, you bring a guy like Andre Drummond. I mean, I think Andre Drummond gets a bad rep. Because I think realistically, like, Detroit's just not a very well built roster. And obviously injuries also kind of their guard injuries in particular will kind of hamper that team. Because I think if you put Andre Drummond in a system like Atlanta, where there's a lot of shooters and a lot of space, that's the kind of system where he kind of, I think, would thrive. That's why, like, there's been, when I thought about, or there was rumors or some sort of rumor I saw about maybe the Warriors going after a guy like Andre Drummond for rebounding purposes. Like, it makes sense. If you have a lot of offensively gifted players around Andre Drummond, and he's asked simply to be, he's led the league 6 straight years in rebounding, for example. His defense is better than it has been. He's much better at reading passing lanes for steals, getting some blocks, not great in guarding guys on the perimeter by any means, but they're still, like you mentioned too, he's young as well, 26, 27. So I think Andre Drummond could fit in a role if Atlanta's trying to make a play like that. And again, I think it makes sense for Detroit to move Blake Griffin or Andre Drummond, because realistically, those kind of bigs together just don't work really in today's NBA.
Yeah, and I think Drummond would really fit well, because you mentioned they have so much three-point shooting in Atlanta that he'd have plenty of space to operate down low. And then also there's going to be plenty of offensive rebounds when you shoot so many threes. And they have the contracts to make it happen if it's something they wanted to pursue. It more so comes on Detroit, like, do they want to stay being this mediocre, fringe playoff team, or do they want to go rebuild and see what they can do moving forward?
Yeah. And then Favors, I think Favors is in the similar category where it's like, if you didn't want to put out, a ton of assets or a ton of young players to try and make contracts work for Drummond, Favors is like the cheaper route to take. It can still give you 17 and 9 as a small ball center, or not even a small ball center, 6'11".
I like Favors. A good fit is Dallas, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think. Oh, that would be nice.
Because Porzingis can play and Porzingis can almost play defensively, power forward or center, and it's like it allows him to be a little bit more versatile. And then you have the spacing for Favors to operate down low, because KP spends most of his time at the 3-point line.
We didn't mention it, or I didn't mention, I should say, but almost everyone we've named, I could see having some sort of role in Dallas.
And they seem to be like one of the buyers. We kind of touched on them previously. Things have sped up for them. Like they're looking like a possible home court team, and it's obvious they need some help for the roster to keep Luka, playing at this level, and then Porzingis is going to take time with the rust.
Yeah, I mean, 16 and 7, they've definitely exceeded expectation. But as you mentioned, Porzingis has been rusty, and again, like, they've gotten some good bench player success to this point in time, but nothing consistent, right? It's been like a Tim Hardaway Jr. performance one night, a Jalen Brunson performance another night. There's no consistent number 2. It's Luka Doncic, and hopefully one or two of these guys have really good nights.
And the nice thing about their roster is they have a lot of movable contracts. They have a lot of like mid-sized contracts you compare together, and then they have the big one in a Tim Hardaway if you're looking to go that way too. So the trade rumors are really picking up. We'll try to do this either every Wednesday or Sunday episode, whatever it may be, depending on how the rumors kind of bang out. But like we talked about, December 15th, things are really going to start to pick up. And the league is kind of picking up, and we're getting a better idea of where teams are at. So I'm going to give you 10 questions about 10 different teams. We kind of go through this a little bit quick pace, and you're going to hit me with the answer. Are you good to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
Can the Denver Nuggets win a championship with Nikola Jokic as their best player?
No.
I agree. I think go ahead.
I was going to say no, because defensively, I don't think defensively your best. I don't think if he's your best player and he has the issues he does defensively, I think you're always at a hole.
Yeah, you're always at a hole. And then I think another thing offensively is the lack of aggression. Sometimes he just doesn't seem that interested in scoring, and you need him to be that dominant force, especially when he's so lackluster defensively.
And again, and I think his conditioning will be a constant thing to kind of point at as well. Because I think your best player, no offense to certain guys out there, you should be also probably the best conditioned player on the team, would be my argument as well.
And if not the best condition, you need to be training the hardest. Where like maybe you don't have a 6-pack, but the team knows that you're the first one in practice and you're the last guy out.
Yeah.
Now on to another Western Conference team. I did 5 West, 5 East. Next up, the Utah Jazz are going to hit expectations this season.
No. I wish, but I have no evidence so far this year that they're anything more than a middle of the pack, maybe a bottom of the pack team in the Western Conference playoff. I think they're a playoff team, but there's been no consistency. Mike Conley doesn't look great. Donovan Mitchell isn't efficient. Rudy Gobert is very limited offensively. I think Bogdanovich was a great signing, but the team as a whole has definitely just been a disappointment.
Yeah, I don't think they'll hit the expectations we had. I think they will be a lot better by the end of the season because they've been known to kind of fix things up in the second half. But I think it's going to end up being slightly disappointing. Next up, OKC is a playoff team in their current state.
Yes. I think when you have this many veterans, this many guys who know how to win on a big stage, and granted, like Chris Paul never won on like the biggest of stages, but Chris Paul, Gallinari, Steven Adams, all three of these guys have been big parts of winning teams. You throw in their basketball IQs mixed with some nice hungry young talent. I think this is a playoff team in their current state.
And then you look at the bottom of the West. Currently OKC is actually the 7th seed at 11 and 12, and that 7 and 8 spot doesn't seem like it's going to be a 50-win team. So it's a real possibility for them to grab it, actually. But next up, this is a do-or-die season for the Minnesota Timberwolves relationship with Karl-Anthony Towns.
I said this last year, right? I think I hinted at it.
I think we talked about it on the Minnesota pod. I think Zach said it was a little bit too early, but let's dive in now.
Yeah, I mean, this is a do or die year. We have seen this time and time again. And I think last year I said we are in the first of, I think in 3 years. I think last year I made the hot take that in 3 years Karl-Anthony Towns will demand a trade. I'm pretty sure I made that hot take. But even still, you're right. The question is valid. This is do or die because again, it's Minnesota. And we also saw, or I'm pretty sure it came out that D'Angelo Russell said he didn't want to go to Minnesota because of just Minnesota being Minnesota. So the fact of the matter is you couldn't bring in one of Karl-Anthony Towns' best friends. Now, granted, it was a sign and trade and it played out how it played. But the fact that a player didn't want to go there because of being Minnesota and the fact that your best player is Towns. Wiggins obviously has played better. You can't really bring in marquee free agents to Minnesota. We've seen that time and time again. And the fact of the matter is, if you constantly are coming up short and not even making the playoffs, your young, growing, arguably best center in the NBA will grow tired of that losing.
Yeah, and I think they just got put into a really bad situation because they committed to winning 2 years ago when they made the move for Jimmy Butler. Then he left and they almost had to restart the rebuild and they tried to make it almost a retool. But I don't know if they're going to have enough time to get that roster together in time for Cat to really be like, hey, I'm going to stay here and win a championship. Like you mentioned, Minnesota's not the most ideal spot to play. But next up, the Lakers have 2 top 5 players on their team.
Yes.
Okay.
Easily.
That was an easy one.
Yeah, I think okay, so throw a question at you. Do you think Trae Young...
No, it's not allowed. It's not part of the segment. I'm just kidding.
Do you think Trae Young and Luka Doncic have had better seasons than Anthony Davis so far?
Ooh, I would say Luka probably has. Like, he's an MVP candidate carrying a team. AD doesn't have to do that on a regular basis because he's playing with LeBron. You could make an argument AD's having a better season because of his defensive impact, but his offensive burden isn't as much, and especially because he's getting set up by LeBron. And I would say AD's probably having a better season than Trae just because Trae's team honestly sucks. And right. I mean, as much as you want to separate the two, it's hard to do.
Yeah, I'm right. I'm right there with you. I think you can make a case for Luka and Davis. I think they're both above Trae easily. Wins mean a lot, and the fact that Trae doesn't play that much defense. I think there is the argument for Luka and Davis. I personally would put Davis higher because the defensive impact he's had, I think, is just enormous, while also having the offense ran through him for the Lakers.
I know people don't like to do this, but I would find it hard if you put Anthony Davis on Dallas and expect him to be in the situation compared to Luka. I think in a way, when we rank players, we underrate the ability to create, and the fact that Luka can do it at such an efficient level just automatically ascends him into being one of the best players in the league. It's hard to put him in the top 5 right now because he has to do it for a whole year. He has to do it in the postseason, but he's on the cusp.
Yeah.
That's the hottest take you'll probably get from me in December. Eastern Conference, though, if Philly lands a fringe all-star guard, they will be the favorites in the East.
I'm guessing this fringe all-star guard
is a playmaking guard.
Does he have shooting?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
he's an offensive minded player. Let's
Yeah.
think Evan Fournier, if we wanted to say maybe he's a little bit less than fringe all star, but let's say they
Hopefully
added
someone
him.
a little bit more athletic. But yes, I
Yeah,
think if they add an offensive player, yes, that's what they lack. Watching them last night, there's just not a lot of. They need 3-point shooters. They need guys who can score off the dribble. They don't really have that.
and they just need someone who can take advantage of the space or lack of space they have, or just all the space the base can create with screens. It just feels like they don't have it. If they had like even a Lou Will type player, I feel like he would just go nuts on a team like that.
Yeah, the issue with like having, I mean, Tobias has done very well as of recent, but again, like somebody at his size and his speed, he can't necessarily do a ton offensively in which he can create space like that.
You want someone who can like go in and out of the trees, if that makes sense. They
Yeah,
can just kind of just like move around and just make life extremely difficult for the
you
defense.
almost kind of wish they had Markel Fultz still.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, if Fultz could shoot, which he's
Right.
been doing okay this year, but we'll see what happens. I think Philly, though, is going to be on the market. We kind of mentioned them a touch before. But next up, the Cleveland Cavaliers will be the worst team in the Eastern Conference by the end of the season.
No, I'm not. I'm sorry. It's the Knicks. I want to say it's someone else for Knicks fans, but again, the Knicks, they don't even tweet out the score at the end of games. And TNT last night, um, I don't know when it happened because I was watching it on MSG anyways because we're in New York. But TNT definitely were supposed to have the Blazers Knicks on at 10:30, and they decided to just do an extra half hour of Inside the NBA and replay the Philly Denver game at 11:30. That's how bad the Knicks are. TNT decided not to even show the game.
You know, I was confused by that because I could have sworn to myself that it was on TNT.
It was. It
Yeah.
definitely was. And I was like,
and
what
then
the hell's going on?
and then I checked on the box score. And then, like, if I want to watch MSG because I have Hulu Live TV, I don't have cable, so it's more difficult for me to watch MSG. And I was just like, okay, it's the Knicks. They're probably going to get smacked. I'm not even going to go through that extra effort right now because they're not on TNT. Then when I checked my Hulu feed to see maybe it was just an error on the website, they weren't replaying the Denver game. They were replaying the Atlanta and Miami game on TNT. It was weird.
That's I didn't even realize that. Yeah, so there you go. That's the Knicks season in a nutshell. They're losing primetime games.
So I mean, and to lose primetime games in December is pretty tough to do. But next up, Eastern Conference team. Think you'll like this one. The Pacers are the most underrated team in the Eastern Conference.
Oh, 100%, yes.
Okay,
Um,
I was hoping for a soundbite, but I just
I mean, again, Zach Lowe, love him, but he had Chicago Bulls as the playoff team, not the Indiana Pacers. And I think everybody, maybe myself included, we didn't expect the Pacers to be this many games above 500 without Victor Oladipo and all the new pieces coming in. They've also had their fair share of injuries, granted nothing overly serious. But again, the Pacers have had a nice stretch of wins. They've had obviously a couple of bad losses along the way, but they have remained a team focused on defense with a lot of talented offensive players. And TJ Warren, Malcolm Brogdon, Jeremy Lamb, I think, has showcased his abilities offensively. Domantas Sabonis has become a clear-cut double-double machine. Miles Turner is probably the biggest question mark, but again, this team, we won't know fully what they are until Victor Oladipo comes back, but you have to love where they are without Victor Oladipo at this point in time.
yeah, a lot of credit to Nate McMillan because you mentioned the injuries, but then also getting the best out of guys. Like we're seeing Malcolm Brogdon play the best basketball of his career. Obviously, his role's a lot bigger, but TJ Warren's playing well. Jeremy Lamb's playing well. And even, if you had told me before the season Miles Turner was going to miss a stretch of games, you'd think the Pacers would struggle. It seemed like it really didn't even matter. And, we didn't touch on him trade season wise, but I feel like that's a name that's going to pop up.
Miles Turner?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a growing discontent among Pacers Twitter on Miles Turner. There's obviously a cult that believe in Miles Turner, but there's also like where I'm kind of leaning towards, which is where I'd rather have a player like Domantas Sabonis who brings you slight playmaking out of the post, very good rebounding offensively and defensively on the boards, great post player where the defense is but Miles Turner brings you just defense, and because of the way Nate McMillan uses him offensively, he's just not a good offensive player. I think Miles Turner is one of those guys who, Pacer fans may hate that I'm saying this, would probably thrive in a change of scenery because Nate McMillan has just failed to utilize him offensively.
I feel like in Brooklyn, Kenny Atkinson wouldn't let him step on the court unless he was shooting 5 threes a game.
Yeah, I mean it's honestly it's almost criminal that the Pacers don't run at least 8 to 10 pick and pops a game with Miles Turner because the looks are there.
Yeah, and I mean he shoots a good percentage. He's not, the best three-point shooter in the league, but enough to open up the offense when at times it has struggled missing Oladipo.
Yeah.
But next up, the Miami Heat would be a home court favorite if they land at Kevin Love.
No. No. I think they're more of a home court favorite team without Kevin Love.
Ooh, that's a hot take. Maybe that's my soundbite right there. Uh, the Boston Celtics will keep the 2 seed all season long.
Oh man, I'm gonna say yes because I think they actually make a trade. I think they bolster their front court. I think they bring in some sort of center that helps them. So I'm gonna say yes, they will into that number 2 spot. Even though that's tough to say because then I just thought about Philly, but I'm gonna say they hold on to it.
It is extremely tough to say. The East is very close in terms of who's going to get those playoff spots. The only thing you feel confident about is Milwaukee in that 1 seed. And you kind of mentioned this earlier. It was a big win for Miami last night. And all I could think about last night watching that game is like, these are the type of games you need to find a way to win because when it comes, at the end of the season and you're looking for that seeding, that one game is going to make the difference between home court or playing, 4 games on the road.
And I got a question for you. Just throwing in questions. Who gets their first home loss first? Boston, Miami, or Philly? Because all 3 teams are undefeated at home.
I'm going to go, I think Miami probably would be my push because they almost lost last night. Philadelphia has just played really well at home and they have a lot of really good players that it's like, okay, we're going to play good at home. We might not be the same on the road. And Boston's kind of caught in between where I'd say the Heat are the most likely to lose first. Then I go Boston, then I go Philly last.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And then watch me. I know the Nets play Philly on Saturday or Sunday, and watch it be in Philadelphia and the Nets win. And I was the one to call it wrong. But that's it for 10 questions. This is something we're going to get back to. This kind of allows us to touch on a lot of different teams in like a fast-paced fashion. But Kory, I'm going to pass it over to you for Believe It or Not.
All right. Don't have a ton of Believe It or Nots, but I do have a few. So catch and shoot 3-point percentage leaders. Marcus Morris at 52%. Terry Rozier at 51%, Fred VanVleet at 49%, Bogdan Bogdanovic, not Bojan, Bogdan at 48%, JJ Redick at 48%, and then Joe Harris, Tyler Herro, and Chris Middleton are all tied at 47% catch and shoot 3-point percentage. Believe it or not.
I do not believe Terry Rozier is going to stay on that list much longer.
Number 2. And Marcus Morris, number 1. Who would have thought?
Marcus Morris, I can believe for now because I know he's an extremely streaky shooter. Where he's hot right now. He's killing it from catch and shoot. He's killing it in all of his 3-point shots. But in a month from now, he might have a cold stretch where he shoots 20% for the month.
Yeah, I think I would also say I don't believe Terry Rozier. I'd also say like Bogdan Bogdanovic.
I think he's good.
I think he's good, but I don't know if I believe the catch and shoot 3-point percentage will remain top 5. I feel like I have more faith in JJ Redick, Joe Harris, Tyler Herro, even, and Chris Middleton taking that jump. And then like right on the cusp was Evan Fournier, Davis Bertans, and CJ McCollum at 45.
I'll bet my guy Taurean Prince will get in the top 10 by the end of the season.
Hot take. I know that's your boy. I mean, he's been balling from 3-point.
Yeah, he's shooting close to 40, and he was a little bit rhythm too. It took him a little time to get into rhythm in Brooklyn, but now he's starting to find that. I could see him really pop off, especially when Kyrie's back. Maybe that other guy, Kevin Durant, too.
But, maybe that other guy, Kevin Durant. Okay, so now next up we have. My bad. Dropped my phone. Okay, most total points in isolation. Did I do this last week?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, most points in isolation. James Harden, 321. LeBron James, 111. Wow. Damian Lillard, 110. Russell Westbrook, 99. Giannis Antetokounmpo, 99. That is the top 5 in total points via isolation as of December 7th, believe it or not.
Say how much James Harden had one more time for me.
321.
I would guess that's more than a good chunk of teams in the NBA right now.
Yeah,
I think they'll all stay. To be honest, they're all good isolation scores.
And I'll give you the top 10 because I have the other 5. Pascal Siakam was at 87. Luka Doncic was at 83. Your boy Spencer Dinwiddie was at 82, and then Brandon Ingram 79. CJ McCollum 75.
Honestly, they're all good isolation scores. Like I don't see anybody on that list not being good at scoring in one-on-one.
It's just incredible that it's James Harden first at 321. LeBron James second with 111.
And then
What a
when you said
discrepancy.
Westbrook 99, right? So then you think
Yeah.
about those two having 400 plus alone. That's definitely got to be more than a lot of teams in the league.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's all I got for Believe It or Not.
So that wraps it up for today. Great show, Kory. As always, big thanks everybody for listening. You can find us on Google Play, Spotify, iTunes, OTGBasketball.com, and YouTube.
Peace out, Knuckleheads.